and across and across and across. Read a couple of verses apiece. And as we're reading Daniel 8, there's an awful lot of stuff, but just try to grab a hold of a couple of the things that really impress you as we read this tremendous and famous chapter. Okay, Julia.
In the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, the king of Asia appeared to me. Daniel subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously. I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Yemen. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the blue light and that.
Then I lifted my gaze and looked, and behold, a ram which had two horns was standing in front of the canal. And the two horns were long, but one was longer than the other, but the longer one coming up last. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beast could stand before him. Nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified him.
While I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came up to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath.
I saw him come close to the ram, who was enraged against him. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And before it came up four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards south and toward the east and toward the Pleasant Land.
It grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and threw sound the starry host down to the earth, and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the prince of the host. It took away the daily sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was brought low.
Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. And he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?
He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, and then the sanctuary will be consecrated. While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man. And I heard a man's voice from the Ulai calling, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision.
So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep, on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright.
He said, behold, I am going to let you know what will occur at the final period of indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the king of Media and Persia.
The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes is the first king. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from the nation, but will not have the same power.
And in the latter kingdom of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, the king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people.
By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand.
The vision of the evenings and mornings which has been told is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. And I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. And I got up again and carried on the king's business. But I was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it.
All right. Tremendous chapter. So this second section of Daniel's receiving 4 visions regarding things that are to come to pass in the future, in the immediate future and in the distant future. 2 years after his first vision, which he received in Daniel chapter 7, he now receives the second one. And this is as Babylon is getting near to falling. It's starting to collapse. Nebuchadnezzar has passed away. Belshazzar is a king, and he's very corrupt and not strong. Daniel receives another vision as he is transported to Susa. There you can see on the map, quite a bit downstream from from Babylon, and the future capital of Persia. Let's just look at some things that initially stand out as we read it. Now, of course, one of the things we don't realize is that now suddenly in chapter 8, we're reading in Hebrew. Chapter 1 was in Hebrew, then chapters 2 through 7 was in Aramaic, and now we're back to Hebrew through the end of this book. So that would imply, what would you think? Now written in Hebrew, what do you think? Well, it's written to be intelligent, especially to the Jews, God's chosen people. So in other words, the focus is located around the Jews. Now, don't forget, Daniel was Jewish, and that would be his focus. He wouldn't have a Christian focus because, of course, there was no such thing at the time. So we'll have to decide whether these visions have part for Christians in it as well as the Jews, but certainly an emphasis is upon the Jews. 2, again, we see the vision morphing from near future history to the little horn at the end of days. So he takes up some immediate history that will be in the next 100 years and then suddenly morphs to the end of time, as we'll note as we're looking. Medo-Persian was the ram. You saw it, it was spelled out. There's no need to guess about these particular beasts. And the flying unicorn goat was Greece. The goat conquered the ram, he gloated, and then his unicorn broke off and 4 more replaced it. I think probably most of you know what that means already, but we will see it in just a minute. Another little horn arises on the goat and gains control over the beautiful land and its surrounding nations. So now this little horn comes up and basically takes over the whole bestial power of that time. A specific time is mentioned regarding the desolation and restoration of Jerusalem and the temple, namely 2300. So that remains to be interpreted. The Prince of Princes, it says at the end of that reading, breaks the horn. And 8, this vision is to be closed for now until a God-appointed future time. You see that in chapter 8, verse 26. It's important to notice these things. The vision of the evenings and mornings which has been told is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Is the way my translation says it, okay? Now, the first thing we want to see is this. When we study the book of Daniel, there's 2 things that are amazing. One, the historical fulfillment of the things that he predicted. Now, give me a rough time of when Daniel was on this earth. He was in the exile, so give me a date. Jen, go ahead. You're coming up with a date. Can anybody know the usual date they say that the temple was destroyed and all the children taken into captivity?
700 BC.
What is it? 586. Most scholars think it was 586 BC. Daniel had already been scooped out of Israel before that. But so Daniel is in the 500s, okay? He's writing these predictions in the 500s, and what he is writing is he's even going to predict down to 165 BC. Now that's amazing. So the first layer, as we look at it just in the near history, you understand why I'm calling it near history? There's the near history fulfillment, and then there's the ultimate fulfillment. And any real prophecy from the Lord usually has a sort of immediate fulfillment and a final fulfillment. And then what's the third point of a real prophecy? Has the third thing to it? We're not going into it tonight. It has principles of things that are presently affecting our lives today in any age. So like when it says that the little horn in Daniel 7 will wear down the saints, that just didn't happen back in 500 BC. And it's not going to happen just at the end of time, although it will be unusually difficult in those days. It's happening now. So you see, prophecy as a principle is applicable to us today. Okay? All right. So let's look at this, a little bit of the background here. I won't go into much of the history. Some of you know it, and others you have no idea, and you're not even interested. But the fact of the matter is, you know what this shows? That God predicts the future in detail and with accuracy. Daniel saw this vision in about 551 BC, 12 years before Babylon's defeat, which is always Babel, by the way, in the Old Testament. That says Babylon. That's a New Testament word. Babel is just Babel, always Babel. 12 years before Babel's defeat and Belshazzar's death, which he predicted, by the way, in what chapter? Right, Daniel chapter 5 was when he saw the handwriting on the wall, right? Many, many tekel upharsin. Remember that song, right? Many, many tekel. Yeah, okay. There we go. So this now is back in those days. So it's coming back with the vision he saw way back then. In verses 3 and 4, the vision transports him to Susa. Now he's in Babylon, but it transports him to that city of Susa. You can see the actual remains of Susa in the lower picture there, and there up above is it was made the capital of Cyrus's capital once he conquered all of the lands that he was going to conquer as the great Persian conqueror. And of course, Cyrus was the great ram who was the power behind the horns that went through pushing this way and that way. And Cyrus accumulated the largest empire in his day. These guys had empires, not just kingdoms. They had empires. Right? Cyrus had a huge empire. And it's interesting that Daniel in 551 is transported to Susa, which back in those days was just a little mosquito-ridden town. It only later became the capital of Persia. When he was taken there, though, he saw it as a citadel in Susa. So he saw it as already a capital city a long time before that actually happened. Okay, so here we go. So 200 years later, the unicorn goat, the one horn on the unicorn is Alexander the Great. You've all heard of him. He was a Greek who took up after his father, who was Philip of Macedonia. And Philip basically conquered Greece itself, sort of. Then he gave it to Alexander, and Alexander flew. He didn't go with his armies in march. He flew. That's how rapidly he disciplined his soldiers. He could take with 10,000 men, 100,000 men. He'd outflank them, he'd beat them, he'd outmaneuver them. He was a skilled warrior, and in 3 years, he conquered Persia. Huge empire. And he conquered it in 3 years, which was a good thing because he died after 5 years. He died of diseases. But anyway, so here is an interesting thing. The vision that Daniel sees is these things fighting over Susa. And in fact, where Alexander beat this Persian army finally was at Susa. And all of these facts of history, hundreds of years later, 324 BC, he saw it in 551. So what's the calculation there? That's a long time. Alexander died 2 years later, and his empire was ruled over by 4 horns, but they weren't as powerful as Alexander's, you could imagine. But 4 generals, they sliced up the territory historically, and it's a well-known fact of history. The 4 divisions were roughly Greece, Asia Minor, Persia, and Egypt. You can kind of see it right there if you want. See, here's Egypt with the guy Ptolemy. He took care of that. And then over here is Asia Minor, and that's Persia over there, and this is Greece. And those are the 4 sections of the Grecian Empire after Alexander's death, taken over by these various gentlemen. After 150 years of Grecian rule, this man came to the fore called Antiochus Epiphanes. He was not a king. He wasn't a regal line, royal line, anything like that. He just kind of came up. He was a sort of a rebel, but he, of course, rose up as a little horn and became the king of the Seleucid Empire. He acquired the south. He moved east and took over the Ptolemy's property. He south, and then he went east, and he snapped up Persia, and then he acquired what he was looking for anyway. The rest was just playthings. He wanted the Yafeh, Aretz, the beautiful land. What's that? Israel. That's what it means. Antiochus Epiphanes trampled Jerusalem, stopped the daily sacrifices, placed the statue of Zeus on the temple grounds, sacrificed a pig on the altar, sprinkled its blood in the holy place. This was in 168 BC, and this is historically the time of the abomination of desolation. In the Jews' temple in Jerusalem, there was pig's blood splattered all over the place. And on the front of the temple, there was a statue of Zeus, which every Jew was commanded to worship. Here is a picture of the empire under Antiochus. Guess why it's all pink? The Seleucid Empire finally basically swallowed up the whole thing for himself. And this was a nobody. He was a little horn. But he was like a Napoleon. He was unstoppable. And he took that all over. But you know what he wanted? That little section. And he made his central ruling place there. Okay. Now, here is a coin, by the way, over there, if you see it. Now, of course, you read Greek, so you can see that it says Basileus Antiochus over on the right side, and that means King Antiochus. And on the other side, it says Theos Epiphanes, which means manifestation of God. Antiochus Epiphanes made coins and called himself Antiochus, the manifestation of God. He built a statue. We'll see it in a couple of slides where people had to come and worship him. He was a god, and you can see his picture on the bottom. That's why he had to make statues that looked different from him, because he was an ugly puss. Okay. For 2,300 days, approximately 7 years, there's a lot of variance among scholars about how long this reign of terror lasted of Antiochus Epiphanes, specifically in Jerusalem. He despoiled the sacrifices. Everything was unclean. It seemed like everything was lost. And then what happened? Who can tell me? I'll give you the lead up to story. So one of the Jews at the command of Antiochus Epiphanes went into the temple with a sacrifice to offer to Zeus. And a priest slew this man. And his son, whose name was the Hammer, started a rebellion that set Israel free. Now, who was that? Does anybody know? Has anybody read the Apocrypha? Those books between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Anybody?
Yes.
You know, there's two books called the Book of the Maccabees, right? Judas Maccabeus. Judas is his name. He's from the tribe. You know, so there's only two priestly tribes left by 165 BC. And what would their names be? Merari? No. What would their names be? The Levitical tribes only had two names left that were pure. What were they? Right, Levine. And what's the other one? Cohen. They were the Kohathites. And so Judas Cohen, aka Judas the Sledgehammer, started a rebellion and took the temple back. Cleansed the temple, restored it, and then their ritual of restoration of the temple, once it's been defiled, was they had to light 8 lamps in the temple, but they only had a day's supply of oil. But they lit the first lamp, And amazingly, the second day, they lit the second lamp. And then they lit the third Hanukkah lamp. And the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. And that's why they celebrate Hanukkah. Because Judas Maccabeus restored the temple, cleansed it, as it said, after 2,300 nights and days, it will be restored. And Judas Maccabeus restored the temple. Praise God. The rebellion was short-lived. It wasn't too long before the Ptolemies came back in there ruthlessly, but they didn't touch the temple. Strangely, only Antiochus Epiphanes, who, by the way, I guess we should end the history. He died that same year by the hand of God. It says he died, but not by man's hand. He died of disease while he was fighting the Parthians out there. Yes.
So on the books of Maccabees, it's been a long time since I was a Catholic. Sorry,
Mhm.
That they're in the Catholic Bible. Is that about this Judas Maccabeus?
Absolutely.
It's just that's their story.
Basically true and historical. Yeah. Good book. Good history book. Anyway, that was a very important time for the Jews because at least they recovered their temple, made it holy. And through the remainder of the time, they kept it alive, and then Herod eventually started fixing it up and so on and so forth. Okay, now, the point being is this: Daniel's vision so perfectly described in near history that only the eternal God could have been the author. This is the thing that drives liberal scholars crazy. They try every possible way to say Daniel had to be written after these events. They're too specific. They're too right. I mean, everybody knows that the emblem of Greece is a goat. The Aegean, the goat in Greek is Aegis, Aeges, Aegis. The Aegean Sea means the goat sea. It's right off Greece. Everybody knows Greece is a goat. Daniel knew it. And he understood that it was Greece before Greece became a great empire. I mean, 200 years before it became an empire. 300 years before Antiochus Epiphanes came on the scene. So these scholars say, oh, well, no, it had to be written post, all this kind of stuff. Well, it must have been written about 164 BC, which would be 1 year after Antiochus Epiphanes died. Which, of course, doesn't make sense because then he went on and predicted what would happen in the Roman Empire, which they'd have to say, okay, he was born after, Daniel was written after Christ, although Jesus referred to Daniel. So, boy, I tell you, liberal scholars have a tough time. You see, originally Daniel was those chapters in Aramaic, and these Hebrew ones were the later emendations. It wasn't in the original one. All kinds of stuff. It's just unbelievable. But they just can't. And yet, with all of this historical thing, which to me is like this, God gives us historical markers to say that things that I predict are going to happen. But the point is for us to understand that the longer ultimate things that he predicts are also going to happen. If you can see the near history work out just exactly as God said, then we should believe that what's going to happen in the ultimate history is also built on the workings of a predictable God. Now, with all of this beauty of history, and a lot of Reform tradition people get off on this history and they go no further. They say, you see, that's the point of Daniel 8, that God predicted the future history through Daniel, and praise God, it's true. But you see, God's burden wasn't to talk about goats and rams. God's burden was to talk about what happened in the end days. Okay, so now we need to look at this thing. Let's notice the time frame that we read and maybe passed over. Okay, Son of Man, as this angel comes and talks to Daniel, he says, now, Son of Man, understand that the vision pertains to the end of time. And he said, behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. Now, is he talking about the end of Antiochus Epiphanes' reign? Is that all that this means? The vision of the evenings and the mornings which has been told is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. So this prophetic statement is to tell us about something down the corridors of time, far down. So far down, Daniel says, seal up this book for now. It won't be understood until Christians are standing near the end of time and can look back and see these prophetic things. God's revelation of the ultimate fulfillment at the end will be just as accurate as the near history fulfillment. That, by the way, is the statue of Antiochus Epiphanes. It was put in the Valley of Statues, where people were supposed to worship these divine kings. Okay. Now, there's 6 spiritual issues that are just seen in this chapter, and we will determine tonight whether you want to go into them in more detail next week. I mean, 2 weeks. There'll be no Daniel Bible study next week. You guys still want to have a meeting? So Harvey Cedars ends on Monday, but some of you, so we'll have a meeting here and people gathering at 6:30, and we're going to have fun because I won't be around. Okay. Now, there's 6 issues that should arrest our attention in this chapter, and some of them involve quite a bit of depth, but let's just touch on them now, and then we'll take a look at them and see if you want to dig a little more into it, okay? Is the little horn of Daniel 7 the same horn as in Daniel 8? Okay. Remember last week, the little horn of Daniel 7 was mentioned. When does the gap occur between the near history and the final days? What is meant by the transgression or the period of indignation? It's mentioned there 3 times in this chapter and more times in chapter 11. Does the equating of the 2 little horns give us any clue as to the possible place of the Antichrist's origin? What conflicts in the heavens and on earth are described in chapter 8, verses 10 through 12 and 23 through 25? We'll look at those in just a second. Do the abominations of the Antichrist mentioned here mean the temple must be in existence in the last days? So there are 6 issues that come out with wonderful, real question marks as we look at this. Yes?
Verse 13 where it says, how long will the vision be? And then it's like 2,300 days. I mean, it's talking about the actual vision. I'm confused about that.
Okay. Well, you know what? I think we'll remind me when we get to that section. We'll touch on it and we'll see. Okay. All right. Now, is the little horn of Daniel 7 the same horn as in Daniel 8? Historicists say no. Now, who are some historicists? This is an interpretive school that interprets prophecy, certainly. Name me a historicist. Joseph. No, Josephus is too early. He was historical. A historicist, name one? Martin Luther, John Calvin, a lot of 20th century preachers, Charles Spurgeon. D.L. Moody didn't really preach too much on the apocalypse, I don't think. They say that there are 2 different horns. The first horn is Caesar, because it comes out of the Roman Empire, and the horn off the 10 kingdoms is a Caesar, or the Pope, who also comes out of the beast of the Roman Empire, and this horn comes up and it's the Pope. And they say the second horn is Antiochus Epiphanes, full stop. He was the abomination of desolation, or the Pope again as the false prophet. So that's why you have 2 horns. In chapter 7, you've got the Antichrist. In chapter 8, you've got the false prophet. You know, in Revelation chapter 13, there's 2 beasts that come out. The beast that comes out of the sea is this 10 kingdom beast with the little horn. And then out of the earth comes this false prophet that's also a beast. He looks like a lamb, but he speaks like a, what's the thing? There's some imagery there. It's just escaped me. What does he look like? Anyway, he's cruel, but he looks like partially like a lamb and then like Bozo the Clown. Okay, I don't know. All right, so they say no. All right. Apocalypticists, those are people who believe that Daniel is speaking about the end of time, just like Revelation is, you know. They say yes. And they just basically say, look, these things, there's so much that they have in common. Both the horns that come out of a beast, both have a character and actions that are similar, like this. Ego, pride-driven horn, destroys three kings around them. Both of these horns do that. A mouth boasting greatness. They wear down the saints, persecute the saints, change the religious practices of the saints. And finally, they're destroyed when they're engaged by the Son of Man coming on the clouds in Daniel 7, and when the Prince of Princes meets this little horn in chapter 8 there in Jerusalem. So they say, yes, this is the same horn, but it's looked at two different perspectives. Okay? You must decide which way you believe on that. Okay. Next question. When does the gap occur between near history and the final days? Now, there's a little, this is a pretty common interpretation, Giovanna. If you look at that 2,300 years, some people say, began with the reign of Alexander and his 4 generals. So, but if we read the verse, let's get the verse. It's not the whole vision. It says, see, listen, I hold the Holy One speaking, and he says specifically, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? While the transgression causes horror and to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled. So how long in Jerusalem is the temple going to be trampled and Jerusalem be trampled is basically the thing. And the answer is this 2,300. So is it 2,300 days? Some people say.
I thought he was experiencing the vision for 2,300 days. And I was like, that's an
Oh,
extremely long time.
You get a major migraine for 2,300 days. You're no good for nothing. You can't even be sustained by a good bowl of candy. It just won't even work.
That makes
All right. Now, when does the gap occur between these two? Well, we can see. Look between verse 22 and 23. In verse 22, it's talking about the broken horn, and the 4 horns arose in the place represent the 4 kingdoms which will arise from the nation, although not with power. Then it says in verse 23, it changes. It says, in the latter period of their rule. The latter, well, how latter is latter? When the transgressions have run their course. Now you see, that becomes the key marker. What was the key marker in Daniel 7 for the end of the time? You remember? The key marker in Daniel 7 for the coming of the Messiah was the thrones of judgment were set in the heavens, and the Son of Man came on the clouds. And that's the end. Now here the end is talking about when the transgressions have run their course. So just keep that in mind. But you see, there is a marker. And so suddenly near ancient history takes, and it says, and in the latter days of the rule, and suddenly we've telescoped down through the centuries to the end of time. So Gabriel's interpretation implies that these 4 kingdoms will still exist for this period of time until the final horn arises. That is to say, the 4 empires of Greece will still exist at the final end. Also, between verses 8 and 9, we can see that there is a change of time, as it were. Verse 8, then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken. So that means Alexander died. And in its place, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great to the south, toward the east, toward the beautiful land. Now, this is the first mention we have of one of these emperors or kings being interested in the beautiful land. Now, they all conquered them. I mean, Rome conquered Israel. The Greeks conquered Israel, as did Persia, as did Babylon. But nobody was that interested in them until this little horn came along, see. And in Daniel 8:14, there is this time period given for the little horn's persecution of Israel until the restoration. There is this little horn's persecution, and then this time of restoration, and this period of 2,300 whatevers. So what this is saying is, many years after Antiope died, his little horn arises with spiritual intentions regarding Israel. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiope as I call The little horn looks like it. See, this is the thing about near history. Near history paints a picture that you have to then exponentially increase at the end of time to understand. This Antiochus Epiphanes, you should read his stories. You should read about this guy. Josephus writes about him. And you should read, you've never probably read any more monstrous person than this guy. And the Antichrist is going to be something like that, the little horn, which most people feel like the little horn's the Antichrist. Do you think the little horn's the Antichrist? Well, you can reserve judgment on that, but that's the usual interpretation. All right. Question 3. What is meant by the transgression and the period of indignation? Let's look at those verses. Loka, read verses 12, 13, and 19.
Verse 12. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spoke, How long shall it be, the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? Verse 19. And he said, Behold, I will make you know what shall be in the last end of the indignation.
Okay, talking about the end of the indignation and a period of transgression. What are these things talking about? On account of transgression, Daniel 8:12, 13. The transgression causes desolation, verse 19. A period of indignation. Verse 23. In the latter period of their rule, when the transgressions have run their course. So many of the prophets, so this means not just Daniel, but who else? You know? Many of the prophets foresaw a time when Israel's transgressions would provoke God's wrath and result in desolation and persecution. Can you name some prophets who said that? Isaiah, exactly. Ezekiel, yes. Jeremiah, yes. Joel, yes. Zechariah, yes. There is a period of time that's predicted in scriptures because the Jews reject their Messiah and reject the laws of God, that God divorces them. And he puts them through a very painful time. It's called the time of Jacob's trouble. Although actually, to be more accurate, the time of Jacob's trouble comes at the very end of the trouble, when things really get intense. So God puts up with his children for a certain period of time. And when they continue to refuse and refuse, then he says, okay, then there's going to be desolation in your midst, and you're going to learn something. Now, let's read Daniel 11, 33, 36. I know we're getting ahead. I don't want you to get too far ahead here. But let's see. Bria, how about reading those? Because listen, here's the point. I want you to hear the serious trials coming on here. And Daniel 11 is just another vision explaining what happened in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. Daniel 11 is another vision with the perspective. But just notice the purpose of these tribulations given here in a redemptive way. Okay?
Those among the people who are wise shall make many understand, though they fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder for some days.
Now that means saints who have wisdom, even some of them will fall during these days. Go ahead.
When they fall, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. Some of those who are wise shall fall, to refine and to cleanse them, and to make them white until the time of the end. For it is the time appointed.
Okay. So you see, some will fall, some will be bewitched during their fall by some coming to give them help. It's a whole lot of intrigue going on at the end of time there in this whole Mediterranean theater, which we have to see develop in Daniel. But just to make it clear, one of the last of the prophets who spoke about this desolation that would come was Jesus himself. Jeff, would you read that? Matthew 23, verses 34 through 39. Now, Jesus was saying this because Jerusalem and the leaders had rejected Jesus completely.
Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes. And some of them you shall kill and crucify, and some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues, and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Is that it?
No. Was that it?
Where am I reading?
Keep going to 39.
O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. For I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth, till ye shall say, Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord.
Okay, so the Lord pronounces, as it were, a curse upon Israel for its rejection of Jesus. And we see in the book of Acts a further working out of that. That's why Stephen got stoned, because basically that's what he said when he was preaching the gospel, that the Jews had rejected the gospel, rejected their Messiah. And so they were being consistent with history. All right, issue number 4. Does the equating of the 2 little horns give us any clues of the place of the Antichrist's origin? Okay. Now, we see here when this little horn comes out in verse 9, that he grows exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. Now, as you can see by these 2 pictures, the Roman Empire, which was the larger of the empires, and the Greek Empire, which was down below there, represent the 2 empires in question where the little horn comes out. Whether you think they're different little horns or the same, if they're the same, does it make sense that they could come out of this whole thing? That's the question we're asking. The 4 kingdoms of Greece were actually included in the 10 kingdoms of the Roman Empire. So both would exist even at the end of times, and therefore this chapter might further point us toward the Eastern Mediterranean for the origins of the Antichrist. So here's what I'm saying. Daniel 7, the little horn comes out of the Roman Empire. Chapter 8, now the little horn comes out of the eastern part of the Roman Empire. Basically, that's at least what it says. And then if we take Antiochus Epiphanes as a sort of a model of something, we realize that he was a Seleucid, which means he was involved there in that whole area of Asia Minor. He pushed toward the west, took Persia. He pushed toward the south and took Egypt, and he went toward the beautiful land. That this would be the movements which we will have to see if they turn out to be that way in Daniel chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11 is a blow-by-blow account of what goes on in the warfare in the last days. Greece is mentioned prophetically because it still had a very significant place to play. It was the place of the fullness of times of the Jewish diaspora. What does that mean? The dispersion of the Jews throughout the Greek Empire. Before the Roman Empire, they were done. They were already out there, but through the Greeks. That's why they became Hellenistic Jews. Right? And Christ was born in the fullness of times, in basically under Greek culture. You know, that whole Roman world, they all spoke Greek because that was the language, that was the culture, that was the philosophy, that was the art, that was the religion. The Romans just gave Latin names to the Greek gods. You know. So it was basically a Greek thing that was the whole period of time that the church came and Christ came and influential things happened. Daniel 8:9. If the Seleucid kingdom was the origin of the little horn, then Syria or Babylon comes into focus as place of origin. Now, where is the little horn or the Antichrist going to be born? There's a lot of theories about that, starting with New Jersey and going right across, run the gamut. A lot of people saying it's got to be Rome. Other people say, no, it's not Rome. It's Paris because, you know, the Holy Roman Empire got over there in France and there's all this kind of stuff. See that? Because why did they move it to France? Do you know the only person in the French whole history that actually called himself and wrote coin, calling himself the Antichrist? Napoleon. He called himself the Antichrist. He believed he was. That's why he tried to attack and destroy Jerusalem. And that's when he found out maybe he wasn't. But anyway, it's another story. So when the whole realm of power was there in France, so people said, Napoleon, you see, there's the Antichrist. And then when it moved up toward Russia, they said, Gog and Magog is up there in Russia. So the Antichrist has gone floating around a lot. But actually, if there's any historical marker to tell us where he rises up, maybe not even necessarily where he's born, it might be in the Syrian or Babylon region, the Seleucid region, the Greek part, where the little thing comes up. So here is the Seleucid Empire that we showed you before. As it pushes east, you see that whole, what color is that out there? What do you call that? Watermelon. That whole watermelon out that way, going out to Persia. He pushed east, he pushed south. He went down into Egypt and the beautiful land. You see, this is the arena of activity. Detailed final history of the kingdoms of the north and the south in conflict. In Daniel 11, there's a tremendous conflict between kingdoms of the north and the south. But let's just look at 11:21. Sarah, if you'll read that first.
Sure. Okay, verse 21. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries.
Okay, now just starting there in chapter 11, after all the 20 verses preceding it, which is full of intrigue and the rising and falling of northern and southern powers, the whole Mediterranean empire, some people think, is looking like that. Mediterranean Union, aka European Union, they say all the purple is going to be fighting all of the orange. And you know what? The purple wins, and then the orange wins, and then the purple wins. And then somebody from the orange marries somebody in the purple, and they form a treaty, and then they break the treaty, and then so that one over on the right, is like a scenario. And so they're fighting north and south, north and south, north and south, north. And just when everything is like in ferment, nobody's winning, up comes this guy, verse 21. He is the king of deceit. He wasn't even really a king. But he ended up making deals with this group. If he had to take down a king, he took down the king. If he could work with the king, he used the king. He made everybody sort of his slave. And he sat back and watched all kinds of things unfold there in the Mediterranean. But you see, his intentions were not for Alexandria or not even for Athens. He wants to be like the Most High God. He wants to be in the seat of God. He wants to be sitting in Zion. He wants to be the dude in Israel. And you'll see as we keep reading in chapter 11 there, how that increasingly becomes discovered. Issue number 5. What are these conflicts in the heavens and on earth described in Daniel 8, 10 through 12, 23 through 25? Now, if you want to say that Daniel 10 through 12, Daniel chapter 8, verses 10 through 12 and 23 through 25 is just about Antiochus Epiphanes, as we said, indeed, he fulfilled many of these things, then how do we explain these things? Caleb, how do we? Maybe we should read verses 10 through 12, and then you'll be able to explain it. All right? Chapter 8, verses 10 through 12.
It says, he grew great, even to the host of heaven.
All right. He grew up to the host of heaven. Now that should cause us pause there. All right, Caleb? Keep reading verse 10. That's all right. Oh, wait, you're using your phone Bible?
And some of the hosts and some of the stars grew down to the ground and trampled on them. Became great, even as...
Whoa. Now, some of the hosts and some of the stars fell to the earth, and he trampled them down. Now, this is the little horn. Now that's Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, then what are these stars that have fallen and the host that he's defeating and trampling on? You see what I'm saying? Keep reading.
They became great, even as great as the prince of the host.
Wait, who's the prince of the host? Wait, who's the host? All right, go ahead.
And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. As the host will be given over to it, together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground and will act and prosper.
All right, now this is some kind of mighty person. Now, okay, so who wants to answer this? Now, who's the stars and who's the host and who's the commander of the host and what is this all he's talking about here? What do you think? Are they angelic beings? Is this a sort of a prophecy of that Revelation chapter 12? Was a dragon in heaven and Michael and the archangels fight and everything, and finally Satan and his angels are defeated and they're thrown down to earth. A third of the stars of heaven are thrown down to earth. In Revelation Revelation chapter 12 is pretty obviously fallen angels that are thrown down to earth along with Satan himself. Now, I don't know what you think about that, but here, at least it's adding in a feature of the little horn that we would have to say is spiritual warfare. This little horn is not just involved in political warfare between other nations. This hosts and these stars that are thrown down. Does anybody know the usual interpretation of this? Just face value interpretation. The hosts, armies, are seen as the Jews. The stars in the heaven are seen as Christians. And that has to do with the prophecy that goes back to the time of Abraham, but we won't go into it right now. But have you ever thought about that? When you read that chapter 8, did you think about that? See, there's some great spiritual conflict here. And if we don't get anything out of Daniel in these couple of visions, we should at least get out of the fact that there's a lot of spiritual importance to the things happening. So Gabriel comes down. Gabriel's like, I don't know, number 3? One of the big archangels comes to Daniel to explain to him these spiritual warfares and things that are going to happen. It's immense kind of stuff. Also verses 23 through 25. Frankie, would you read that?
In the later part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a stern-faced king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power.
So we should stop there, right? Notice again, he shall become very strong, but not by his own power. So again, we're dealing with spiritual dynamics here for sure, right? Okay.
He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy the mighty men and the holy people.
Whoa, he will destroy the mighty men and the holy people. During this time, even believers are martyrs. Okay.
He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power.
Now he will finally take he will oppose the prince of princes. Now who's the prince of princes? Well, you see, I mean, there again, this is all veiled in a mystery in the Old Testament. And I bet you Daniel couldn't put his finger on it and say, it's the Messiah. So let's say the prince of princes, maybe it's Michael, because he's one of the prince angels. But in any case, do you see this is a tremendous spiritual battle going on here? This Daniel chapter 8 is talking about, for sure, end time things and not just what was going on over Greece. I hope you will see that although there was great historical fulfillment there in Greece, but this chapter reaches to the end of time. And so we need to be aware of these kinds of things. These fighting hosts and everything there, as we read in verses 8, 11, and 12, seem to be over Jerusalem and the temple. What's in Revelation chapter 11? You remember how that ends up, begins? Without looking it up. Anybody remember? I'll give you the beginning. So John eats the little scroll. And the angel says, okay, you're going to have to eat that because I got many more things you prophesied. And then what does he say? Now, as for the temple, what happens? Now, it is for the temple, it'll be left alone, but the outer court will be trampled by the Gentiles for 3.5 years. And then 2 witnesses will be raised up. Maybe this has something to do with these witnesses, these mighty men who nevertheless fall in the end. I mean, I'm just trying to get you to think about correspondence between this book and the Bible and that. There's something for you to go back and look up there, right? And then Daniel 8:24, this horn is able to destroy mighty men and the holy people during this period of time. There's a definite period of time, 2300s. Some people think years, some people think days. You see, 2300 doesn't quite come out to 3.5 years. It comes out to 3 something, but not quite 3.5. Or is my calculation right on that? Right? What is it? Oh, 7 years? Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it comes out a little more than 7 years, a little less. So it's dealing with a period of time. But some people take that as 2300 is years. And then the whole key is when you start counting. Because on that picture back there, Giovanna, when did it say that Christ was coming back? 2025. Yeah. That means you got about 11 more years. So anyway. I wouldn't say, oh my gosh, over that chart. But anyway. Just showing you stuff. Okay, number 6. Do the abominations of the Antichrist in 8:13 and 14, 9:27. Well, we should read these. 8:13 and 14. Elisa, 8:13 and 14. Jan, you've got 9:27. Daniela, 11:31.
All right, Danielle 8:13 and 14.
Huh?
Where are we?
No. Elisa.
Oh, good, great. My Bible down.
11. Now, don't put your Bible down.
Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply while the transgressions causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be trampled.
Okay, now you see, unfortunately, and I don't know why they do this. That word there that says, how long will it be? Well, the transgression causes horror, but that says abominations causing, anyway, it's the word that's used later for abomination. I don't know why they don't translate that way in this passage. But let's leave it as such. Okay, Jen, 9:27.
The weight of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate.
Okay. And then 11:31.
His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish this daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation.
All right. Now, what other prophet spoke about this abomination of desolation? Besides Daniel. What is it? No. Don't get too spiritual. Let's go to the New Testament. Jesus. And who else? John. So this abomination of desolation is an important part of this end time thing. And it has to do with the temple and its desecration or something like that. So here's the question then. Does the temple have to be in place in the last days? So then are we all cool? Don't have to worry until we see the temple built and the mosque knocked down? Tell you what, if that mosque is knocked down, I don't know if the world would survive until the temple got built right now. I don't know what would happen, but it's interesting. Some people say, no, it doesn't mean that. It means God's holy people, the Christians, will go through abomination of desolation, but I don't know, it's a little tricky right there. What do you think?
You do have that society that has all the pieces, right, ready to go?
The Temple Institute, they're always asking for money because they've got all the Cohens and the Levines studying the proper sacrifices of the animals, and they're ready to do the sacrifices. And they're getting the equipment and the furnishings. They're actually building the different spoons and the things and lamps and getting ready for the rebuilding of the temple. The Temple Institute, they're absolutely serious. They're Jews, by the way. They're not Christians. They're Jews. Yeah.
Does it have to be exactly at that location?
Well, there you go. And then we get into a whole thing. And if the Jews have that temple, how could they have that temple and still do sacrifices and believe in Jesus? There's a lot of problems there, you see. All right. Daniel 9:20 and 11:31. The Antichrist abomination is in Jerusalem. Jesus makes reference to Daniel's prophecy here in 24:15. Let's read 24:15 and Luke 21:20. Evelyn, Nikki.
In Matthew 24:15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand.
Okay. And Luke 21:20.
When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near.
All right. So we have these things, and we're just putting them out there because as we continue to read along, we'll see some more things clarified in this great mystery of end time things. All of us have to humbly hold these things. If anybody gets too assured, then we know they're off. So we know the Antichrist isn't coming from New Jersey. We know he's not coming from New York City. New York City isn't Babylon. Hollywood isn't Babylon. I mean, this is where a lot of people go with these kind of prophecies. Okay. Now, let's just take a quick summary here, and then I've got a long little section for us to read regarding what's going on today. One, a geographical reference is given us in the little horn's rise through Greece upon the ruins of the Medo-Persian Empire. It means the little horn may grow up on that eastern side of the Mediterranean theater. Two, the fourfold division of Greece apparently exists at the end of the indignation when the Antichrist arises. So these nations will still be around, called by whatever names. Three, the horn acts in blasphemy against God, tyrannizes Israel, and destroys her religious forms and places. Now, whether this also is to include Christians in the end days, it doesn't say. This is a sort of a Jewish-centered prophecy, it seems to me. Four, he finally meets his end, that's the little horn, when he stands against the Prince of Princes and is destroyed by direct action of God. Now we've got some good readers here. Giovanna's one. Now, there's a guy who's just recently written some stuff. His name is Michael Youssef. He's quite a popular preacher, has been around a long time. This is a little excerpt from an article called The Antichrist and the Muslim Mahdi. So every time I say Mahdi, Giovanna, you have to throw in the, okay? All right, so you read the first page. It's 3 pages long. Try to pay attention to this because this is talking about when you hear what the Muslims, Islam talks about the Mahdi doing, it's quite interesting coming out of that Iran and Persian basin. All right, let's go, Giovanna. Can you read it?
Muslims see the Mahdi as a savior who will lead a global revolution and establish a worldwide Islamic empire.
Now, this was written before the ISIS thing ever came along, by the way. Good.
The Mahdi will rule the earth as the final caliph of Islam. The caliph is both a political ruler and a spiritual representative of Allah on earth. Muslims revere Jesus, whom they call Isa, as Masih or Messiah. In Islamic,
they call him Isa.
Isa.
Not Isa. That's it.
In Islamic eschatology, the Mahdi will arrive at the same time that Isa returns.
So they both return. Jesus returns, the Mahdi returns.
Isa will descend to earth in Syria, east of Damascus, dressed in yellow robes, and will assist the Mahdi, who will rule over the earth for 7 years, or in some Islamic traditions, 9 or 19 years. At the end of the Mahdi's rule, there will be a day of judgment for the entire human race. The parallels between the biblical Antichrist and the Mahdi of Islam are chilling. Both are associated with the end times and judgment. Both possess political, military, and religious power and head up a one world religion. The Mahdi will force all non-Muslim people to convert to Islam. Like the Antichrist, the Mahdi will establish Jerusalem as his capital, from which he will rule the earth. Islamic scholars Muhammad ibn Izzat and Muhammad Arif write, the Mahdi will be victorious and eradicate those pigs and dogs and the idols of this time so that there will once more be a caliphate based on the prophethood as hadith.
The Hadith states.
The Hadith
That's the
states.
holy writings.
Jerusalem will be the location of the rightly guided caliphate and the center of Islamic rule, which will be headed by Imam al-Mahdi. That will abolish the leadership of the Jews and put an end to the domination of the Satan who spit evil into people and caused corruption in the earth, making them slaves of false idols and ruling the world by laws other than the Sharia, Islamic law of the Lord of the world.
Okay. Let's see. Nikki, you read this next page. It just continues the article.
The Muslims revere Jesus as a prophet. They deny that Jesus is the Son of God. Jews and Christians are, to Muslims, fundamentalists, pigs and dogs.
The Jews are called pigs, by the way, and Christians are called dogs throughout the Quran and the writings of Islam. Good.
Pigs and dogs who must either convert to Islam or be eliminated. Bible prophecy makes it clear that the Antichrist will target Jews and Christians for destruction, just as Islamic prophecy states that the Mahdi will wage war against Jews and Christians. Those who oppose the Antichrist worldwide religion will be executed. Muslim scholar Imam Muhammad Bakir states clearly how the Mahdi will establish his one world religion. There must be bloodshed and jihad to establish Imam Mahdi's rule. The Ayatollah Ibrahim al-Amini of the Religious Learning Center in
Qom
agreed. The Mahdi will offer the religion of Islam to the Jews and Christians. If they accept it, they will be spared. Otherwise, they will be killed. Daniel tells us, and Jesus affirms in the Olivet Discourse, that the Antichrist will establish the abomination that causes desolation in the temple in Jerusalem. The Apostle Paul adds that the Antichrist will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. Since the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, as Jesus predicted, this has led some, not all Christians, to suggest that the Jewish temple must be rebuilt on the Temple Mount before the Antichrist can be revealed to the world.
Okay, Bria, take us home.
Yeah, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque stand.
That's that present mosque with the golden top, Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Stand on the Temple Mount today. One of the Islamic hadiths or traditions records that their prophet Muhammad said, armies carrying black flags will come from Khorasan, Iran, and Afghanistan. No power will be able to stop them, and they will reach Ela, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, where they will erect their flags. In Islamic tradition, black banners symbolize violent conquest, and Muslims await the Mahdi's conquest of Jerusalem when he establishes his reign from the temple site. Daniel 9:27 tells us the Antichrist will establish a 7-year covenant with Israel, but he will break the covenant after 3.5 years, defiling the temple with an abomination that causes desolation. The Hadiths of Islam also speak of a 7-year covenant that the Mahdi makes with Israel. The prophet said, there will be 4 peace agreements between you and the Romans. The 4th will be mediated through a person who will be from the progeny of Hadrat Aaron, Honorable Aaron, the brother of Moses.
In other words, a Jewish priest.
It will be upheld for 7 years. There can be no doubt. Muslims are preparing to accept the Mahdi as their ruler, and the Mahdi is indistinguishable from the world leader we know as the Antichrist. I bring all of this to your attention so we can have a knowledgeable perspective when viewing current events unfolding in the Middle East.
Now, the Islam profession is a very wide confession. There's many who have a very basic understanding of praying and submitting to God and going about their lives in a righteous way, not smoking and not drinking and some things like that. But these are some of the writings of Islamic writings that are apocalyptic and that predict their victory as the Mahdi comes and does his final day work. So we shouldn't be surprised. Just as an example, if you are a Sunni Muslim, by the way, only the Sunnis believe in a caliphate. So the Shiites are hated and they will be destroyed. They are unfaithful because this had to do with Muhammad's brother breaking away from him and starting the Shiite thing. It's a whole. Anyway, it's a long story. So you can imagine being a Sunni Muslim in Iraq and suddenly seeing these black flag people come and say, we're setting up a caliphate. And if you have seen enough end time stories and read Left Behind, you might say, hey, this may really be it. I better be careful and get on the bandwagon, or at least not get in the way. And that's how they swept through Iraq. It was among the Sunni Muslims who just accepted them, embraced them, gave them their weapons, left the army, joined on their side, and now they're wreaking havoc. Now, if this is true, if this is their true perspective of the ISIS group, then this is what we know. Iran will do anything to stop them in the end, because Iran's Shiite and they will destroy Shiites. It's one of the reasons they're going right now. They're within 5 miles of Baghdad. And don't you think they want Baghdad? If they get Baghdad, America will be so embarrassed. They've got their whole, what do they call it? Gray zone, do they call it? Or the green zone? But the green zone. The green zone is a fortress that's built around the American embassy in Iraq. So, I forget how many, 7,000 soldiers, high-tech stuff. Man, ISIS wants Baghdad. Because the next step from Baghdad is what? Going down into southern Iraq and right into Iran. Okay, they think the Shiites are unbelievers. Anyway. So for some of you, you don't know these things, you haven't heard these things, so this is just a perspective. Now, are these radical? Yes. These imams talking this way and these hadiths. But the unfortunate thing about the Muslim writings is, even though they're so contradictory and all over the place, you have to believe them all. And you have to read them in Arabic. They're only powerful, by the way, if you read the Quran in Arabic. That's why you don't see many English versions of Qurans. It's really not very faithful. If you're reading in English, you read the words in Arabic and they're magic. So they believe. So you read the words. If it says, kill the unbelievers, you just read, kill the unbelievers. You're not making a judgment, you're just reading it. Because by reading it, you're perfected. It's craziness in these last days. It's craziness. Well, we don't know what's going to happen in this whole movement right now. Hard to tell. But let's have our eyes open. Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, if he's gonna get the respect of Israel, if he wouldn't reveal himself as a person, like a Muslim, until the 3.5 years have passed.
You mean
like he's a secular leader, and then he says, "No, I'm
okay, so you're talking about. I mean, this is one of the things about the Antichrist of the little horn is that he actually may have Jewish origins, which he keeps secret, and then reveals once he's in with the government and everything, just takes it over. But I don't see that in the scriptures as much as I see somebody from the east side. And I'm just very thankful it leaves me out because I'm from Western Europe. All right. Well, that's a long night, but I think we're going to move on next time to the first half of Daniel chapter 9. Okay? Because we come back and retrace these things again back in chapter 11. And by then you should have a pretty clear concept of Daniel's vision of the end times. Lord, we're so thankful for history, for the accuracy of the prophecies as they rolled out in history through Antiochus Epiphanes and all these things that happened with Persia, Greece. and Susa and the whole thing. It's amazing, Lord. And you're an amazing God. And you gave Daniel insight that's amazing. And we also believe that his insights into the end times, interpreted by the angel Gabriel, is also just as amazing and just as accurate as the Word of God, even if we don't understand its ramifications. We don't understand all of these aspects about what the transgression is, what the time of all these timing things. But Lord, we trust you. We believe that you'll open these books that have been shut and reveal to your children so that we might live in wisdom in the days in which we live. Thank you, Lord, for your precious word. We believe it. In Jesus' name, amen.